Ole Miss can absolutely win the West in 2023. We'll tell you how.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. Subscribe there if you would. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. That means Ole Miss every day. Hi, I'm Stephen Willis, and this is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, and I hope everybody is having a pretty good Monday. Just a pretty good Monday. And I'm not going to expect a good Monday, just a pretty good Monday. Anyway, Ole Miss can absolutely win the SEC West in 2023. I know the favorites out there is LSU and the Alabamas and all the usual suspects, but Ole Miss can absolutely do that. And why? The same way that they made the jump between 20 and 2021. A lot of the same type pieces are in place for that type of a jump to happen. If Ole Miss can make an improvement on defense, which it is poised to do, you're looking at a team that will be really tough to beat. And then you take the ESPN FPI, and we're big on the FPI on this show. Ole Miss is over a 60% probability favorite on the ESPN FPI in 9 of the 12 games this season. Now, they're like over a 60% underdog in the other 3 games, and those 3 games are LSU, Alabama, and Georgia. But in a situation like this, if Ole Miss can upset one of those, and they just say LSU and Oxford, if Ole Miss can get that game, and beating LSU and Oxford with that type of a probability gap is not that significant of a stretch, you're looking at a place where chaos could happen in the SEC West, and it could come down to tiebreakers. And in that case, Ole Miss having Georgia on their schedule is going to actually be a benefit if the others slip up in the division as well. Ole Miss has a chance to get where they need to be. They do not have the most talented team in the SEC West, but they have a chance to get to levels that honestly we haven't seen since 2003, to where you're playing a game in the 3rd weekend of November that is actually meaningful towards the SEC championship game. That is the goal. This is the last year of the SEC West. It would be interesting to see Ole Miss kind of make that run. Now, one thing I do want to point out, right? If you look at this is the 2021 and 2022, just the baseline over-the-top stats, right? Whenever you look down at 30,000 feet, this is what it looks like. And if you look at it, the points for were 3 points different. The offense was really similar. It might have been stylistically different, but it was effectively the same. 33 points, 0.7 in 2021, 33.5 in 2022. Lane Kiffin offenses, you're going to put up yards. He's had a top 10 offense every year he was here. If you look at him defensively, opponent's points per game, 24.7. That's 51st in the country. Last year, it was 25.5. That's 57th in the country. If you look at the over the top and just look down at what happened from 2021 to 2022, you can see there's not much difference. So what happened? Why was there such a drop-off? What was the difference between 10-2 and 8-4? And it comes down to this. These are the turnover splits between 2021 and 2022. Offensively averaged 0.8 turnovers per game in 2021. The defense got 1.6. That was nearly a turnover a game better. So they were in the minuses or pluses, however you want to put it, whichever side of the ball you're on in the turnover category. In 2022, the offense turned the ball over more than the defense got it. So the defense got it 0.1 less than they did in 2021. But it was almost a turnover a game greater offensively. And that is the explanation between 10-2 and 8-4. If the splits turnover-wise start to look a little bit more like 2021, this is a team that could go really, really far in the SEC schedule. All the analytics are pointing towards a really successful year. Now, if you look at betting lines and things like that, I think they have the over-under at Ole Miss at 7.5. But if you look at the probability, Ole Miss is favored to win those games. Why are the betting lines higher, like at a lower number than the probability games? And it's probably because of the turnovers that I mentioned here. If Ole Miss can correct these turnover things, if Jackson Dart, if he wins the job, fixes the turnover and gets it to a Matt Corral level that 2021 was, and you can kind of unlock the offense, you have a chance to be pretty special, honestly. So did want to talk about that a little bit, because that is the difference that Ole Miss is looking at between a 10-win season and another 8-win season. All of the stuff that happened at the end of last year, between the difficulty of the schedule, Lane Kiffin to Auburn, playing Arkansas 5 days before playing Mississippi State, all of those things are going to be rectified this year. You don't have to worry about necessarily any of them. The September schedule is not difficult. Instead of Arkansas, you replace them, a road game at Arkansas, you replace it with a home game versus ULM. The flip side of that is Mississippi State 5 days before plays Southern Mississippi in one of the dumbest scheduling moves I've ever heard about in Mississippi. This would be like Ole Miss loading up with Memphis right before they played Mississippi State. It makes no sense. But schedule-wise, it sets up pretty well. There's no like front-ended or back-ended schedule that just really can hurt Ole Miss and what they want to do. Honestly, there's a 2-game stretch at the end of September that could determine whether or not Ole Miss is a contender or not. Because Ole Miss probably, if they want to win the West, needs to get one out of Alabama and LSU. Needs to happen. For all the tiebreaker scenarios that we're going to talk about in the next segment, Ole Miss needs to get one of those 2 games. Now, probability-wise, it's LSU. LSU is only a 66 probability favorite in that game. But Alabama has the most question marks, and there's so many things swirling and so many questions that have to be answered. Now, we think Nick Saban is going to answer them, but I will say this. We all just assumed Bobby Bowden had all the answers as well until he didn't. And when he didn't, it collapsed pretty quickly. So the coaching on the sideline and questions, we can assume they're going to be answered until they're not. I'm not expecting Ole Miss to beat Georgia. My preview is up on Friday for that one, and we're going to preview Louisiana Monroe today. But the games that matter, those 2 games, one of those 2 games, if we want Ole Miss to get where we want Ole Miss to get, because like I said, Ole Miss is an FPI favorite in 9 out of their 12 games in the SEC this year, or not in the SEC, in their schedule this year, by over 60%. There's no situation to where they're like a 52% probability over Arkansas. That doesn't exist. In fact, there's only 2 games out of those 9 where Ole Miss is less than a 70% probability favorite. And that's against Mississippi State in the Egg Bowl, where they're 60% favorite, and Texas A&M at home, where they're 60% favorite. There's no games in the 50s. There's no true toss-up games. They're all games that Ole Miss has more than a 20% chance, probability-wise, of winning that football game. It's not so much of a toss-up. Now, can Ole Miss lose those games? Yes. It's a football game. Any football game can be lost. But probability-wise and playing that game on paper, it's going to be a tough sled for anybody that is playing against the Ole Miss Rebels this year. But the key for Ole Miss in the Ole Miss season to try and win the SEC West in this last year of the SEC West is winning one of Alabama and LSU. They can do it. They've got the talent to do it. But if you get one of those wins, this has a chance to be an extremely, extremely special football season. Now, I do want to let you know that today's show is brought to you by the FanDuel Sportsbook. It is time to take a swing betting MLB on FanDuel, and you can get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets. That's up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 back in bonus bets, win or lose. That's right. $200 you can spend betting everything from money line to over under to who you think is going to hit the first home run. All on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. Anyway, I do realize that Mississippi is a brick and mortar casino state where if you want to gamble on sports, you have to go into a casino to do that. But if you go to Louisiana, if you go to Tennessee, you can take advantage of this FanDuel Sportsbook. New Orleans, Louisiana, for a road game at Tulane, Baton Rouge, Shreveport, Delta, Louisiana, right across the river from Vicksburg, up to Memphis, Tennessee, Jackson, Tennessee, Nashville, Tennessee, Gatlinburg, whatever you want, you can use the FanDuel Sportsbook there. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook for a reason. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, it's an official partner of Major League Baseball. All right, thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. Everydayers, later on this week, we're going to set it up. Charles Stackhouse is coming. He's a great interview. He's just a treasure trove to talk about Ole Miss football about. And also, he's a really good football player from Ole Miss past. Every time he comes on the show and I talk to him, I ask him something about that 7 overtime game versus Arkansas because it's just such a weird night. I can remember watching that game up when I was living in Pennsylvania, and it was just absolutely nuts. But I generally ask him about that as well. Now, how can Ole Miss win the SEC West? Now, on paper, just looking at it, if you look at probabilities and everything else, there's 2 teams in the pecking order above Ole Miss in the SEC West. If you go by probabilities, I would probably look at Ole Miss as 3rd in the SEC West, but they'll probably be 4th whenever the media votes because they just love Texas A&M and they're just going to keep betting on talent and betting on money until something happens. But how can Ole Miss do what they need to do to win the SEC West? Now, this is the schedule for each of the 3 favorite teams in the SEC West. You can see how there's landmines on each one. This is a season that I think that 6-2 will probably get you to Atlanta. So at Ole Miss, you need to get to 6-2, which probability-wise, like I said, that is one, quote, upset that you need to get because they're over 60% favored in all the others. So take care of business, chalk in your games you're favored with, get somebody that you're not favored against, and you are strictly in this conversation. That's it. This isn't a hard situation. If Ole Miss beats LSU at the end of September, there's a good chance that at the end of the year, Ole Miss is preparing to go to Atlanta. Period. This isn't a difficult thing. Somebody's going to say, oh, make some joke about Ole Miss and talk about how it never can happen. No, that is the scenario. Get a win in Tuscaloosa with the quarterback and the coordinators, and it just doesn't work. And all of a sudden, you're in the conversation at the end of the season. This isn't a situation where you need 17 things to go right to get to that game. This isn't a situation to where you just don't have the players to get it done, to where you're just kind of hoping. Honestly, similar to 2003, where we were hoping that Eli would just continue to will them to victories. No, this Ole Miss team has the most talent that I've had in my lifetime on an Ole Miss team. Period. There's no team that has been as talented as this. I mean, you're looking at potentially the #1 running back in the country, probably a top 1, 2, or 3 quarterback in the SEC if Jackson Dart wins it. The wide receiving core will be featuring 2 first-team All-Conference USA receivers on the outside, most likely. 2 top 10 NFL projected draft picks at tight end. And 4 of the 5 returning on the offensive line with all-conference level players being brought in to compete for that other spot. This team has a chance to be really good. I've been telling you this, and my everydayers can attest to it, for months. Everybody looks at Ole Miss and they want to poke apart. It's like, okay, well, they could drop a game at Auburn. And even I said that whenever I'm doing my W's and L's. I was like, that one's kind of the trap game. That's the game I'm nervous about just because of everything that could be going on. But if you look at these schedules, the Alabama schedule and the LSU schedule, they have traps too. They have games that are iffy at best. Now, Brian Kelly's a really good football coach and Nick Saban's the GOAT, but you still have to win those games. Alabama has games on their schedule against two teams they lost to last year and two teams that they won on the last play against. And it was like absolutely nuts. This happened. And the Texas A&M is at College Station. The last time they went there, Texas A&M beat them. Last year in Tuscaloosa, it went to the last play. So there's so many questions on so many teams. I just don't think that you can discount anything that I'm saying right now. Now, I do want to point out this after looking at that. I think this year has a chance for chaos. Absolute chaos. 3 or 4 teams with 2 losses in the SEC West, potentially. I think that is going to happen. I do not think Auburn is going to be very good. I do not think Mississippi State is going to be very good. I do not necessarily think Arkansas is going to be very good, which is going to be the formula needed for 3 or 4 teams to be kind of not necessarily elite, but the extreme top crust of the SEC West in the last year. And the one thing, the record of tied teams within the division, okay? So if Ole Miss can get an Alabama or an LSU game and win that one, within the division, they should go 5-1. Because Ole Miss likely is the other loss they would do would be the Georgia Bulldogs. That's out of the division. And this is a situation where playing that game and that game on this schedule actually helps Ole Miss. Because if LSU loses to Alabama and Texas A&M and you have a situation to where Arkansas beats LSU and Ole Miss beats LSU, you have them with 2 losses within the division going up against an Ole Miss team that has only lost once. The key will be to win a game in Tuscaloosa, which will be difficult, or versus LSU, which will be difficult. Their Ole Miss is considerable underdogs to both. But if you get one of those games, you have a chance to be pretty much in the conversation at the end of the year, which is honestly all that we want. And if you look at probability, like I said, the ESPN FPI, 9 games out of 12, Ole Miss is at least a 60% favorite in. That's not even toss-up games at that point. That's like either serious favorite or serious underdog, but there's not necessarily toss-up games on that. Now, I'm not saying that Ole Miss can't lose those games, because they can. Football games can happen. Weird things can happen. But if everything goes chalk, Ole Miss is positioned in exactly the right place to maximize 2023. And let's not forget what's coming in 2024. I've said for months that Ole Miss needs to be doing what they can to maximize 2023, but always have an eye towards 2024, because it just doesn't make sense not to at this point. So we'll see what's going on. Anyway, when we come back, we will talk about the ULM Warhawks. And also we're going to introduce the ESPN FPI to the percentage. So if you want to stick around for that, you can see exactly what Ole Miss is favored by against every opponent on their schedule. So stick around. Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. For your second listen, go to Locked On SEC. Chris Doherty does a heck of a job. Honestly, does a really good job. I go on that show all the time. It's really cool at covering the SEC as a whole. Now, we're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Ole Miss every day. But everydayers, Charles Stackhouse is going to probably come on the show this week. That's the plan. We haven't set up a time just yet, but he has agreed to do it this week. So we'll see what happens. I love talking to Charles. Anyway, I'm Stephen Willis, and this is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. And we are talking about game number 11, which is the ULM Warhawks. So get ready for that. Now, ULM went 4-8 last year, 3-5 in the Sun Belt. They're head coached by Terry Bowden. Hey, look at that. I guess he did. He went to ULM with Rich Rod, didn't he? And now Rich Rod's at Jacksonville State. You have a situation where they're not a particularly good team, and I think Ole Miss is like a 98% FPI favorite in this game, maybe 97. But if you look at the offense has to start working better, which is not a good preview bullet point for any team that's going. Now, in November, there's going to be a lot of stuff that gets fixed. You have a quarterback situation that's pretty thin, leaving former JUCO transfer Jael Wright as the lone option with any experience in the attack. He's a decent runner, but he needs to rise up fast as a consistent passer. The receiving core should help as well with deep threat Tyrone Howell, still around after leading the way with 50 catches for 852, 6 scores, and Alfred Luke is back is a quick inside target who needs the ball more. The line got hammered by the transfer portal. Victor Cutler is off to Ohio State. Massive guard Peyton Dunn is a Houston Cougar, and now the patching begins. It's just a situation where G5 teams are just a target, or basically a minor league system for the Power 5. Defensively, their defense was 109th in the country, and they couldn't stop the run. The secondary is their biggest strength, but that's not good going against Quinshawn, by the way. The linebackers and front six have to be stronger. They obviously run some sort of a hybrid defense, either 4-2-5 or 3-3-5 as well. Their key to the season is more big plays. Again, it's offensively challenged, and their defense can't seem to stop anybody, so it doesn't look good for the Warhawks at the moment. The receivers do have the ability to stretch the field. The backs can move, and now the offense has to start coming up with more chunk plays. There has to be a dangerous element to the attack, but more than anything, the Warhawk defense has to create problems, more sacks, pressure, stops, and takeaways. So they need explosives, essentially, and that'll be interesting to see as well. Now, their biggest transfer in was Donnell Harris from Texas A&M. He's an edge player, so he's probably going to be tasked with getting after the quarterback. Victor Cutler did go to Ohio State, and the Warhawks have a potentially great pass rusher in Kennard Snyder, but they need a whole lot more. Harris was a 5-star recruit for the Aggies who didn't see much of the field, but there's just too much talent not to rise up and rock with a bigger opportunity. I don't know about that. It could be more of an evaluation issue. If somebody just consistently doesn't produce, it's like you think they should. The numbers are there. If you look at the spreadsheet, it's there. But, you know, if the guy's a senior and has never done it, you just have to kind of assume that he's not going to ever do it. So the offensive line would be fantastic if everybody stuck around, but losing left tackle Victor Cutler, he's liable to work as a backup guard to Ohio State hurts. Yeah, seriously, G5 schools get picked now. That's just the way it is. To go from a G5 to a Power 5 is like going from double to triple A, you know, or getting the major league call up in some situations. This guy going to Ohio State from ULM is definitely doing it. It's like A-ball to Major League Baseball. So their key player is Jael Wright. I'm butchering that name, and I apologize to the young man if I am. No pressure or anything, but the entire season might fall on his all-around game, considering there isn't any obvious options to push for the gig. The former JUCO transfer is a good mid-range passer who can keep things moving with his legs, but didn't see a whole lot of time his first 2 seasons. Now he has to make everyone around him shine. Now, if you look at it, everything's going on. Their schedule in November, as far as a ULM schedule goes, that's brutal. At Roberts at Southern Miss, that's going to be a big game. Then they play the Troy Trojans, who won 10 games last year. They go to Ole Miss the next week, and they close with their game at Louisiana. Ole Miss is a 97.8 FPI favorite in this game. Now, W's and L's, we've added the ESPN FPI of every game on the W's and L's because I didn't want to give that away too early. Now that we're getting towards the end, I do want that to be on there and everybody to see that. You can see the biggest 2 toss-up games on Ole Miss's schedule. are probably Texas A&M, and at Mississippi State. At 60% Ole Miss probability wins each way. Anything more than that, if you want to count it as a toss-up, you have to count LSU as a favorite as a toss-up as well, and nobody wants to do that. So you have a situation where there's not necessarily toss-up games on the schedule. There's just not. Whenever you do the W's and L's and you kind of throw up toss-ups, that's the kind of the new trend in college sports. These aren't there. Ole Miss is at least a 20% probability winner over their opponent against A&M, Mississippi State, Auburn, and Arkansas. It's absolutely nuts. Ole Miss is over 70% for in 6 games. What is that? ULM, Vanderbilt, Arkansas, Georgia Tech, Tulane, and Mercer, all over 70% win probability. So nobody's going to just looking at these FPIs. And if you look at my picks, my only L, I did try to pick one game that Ole Miss would win a game and Ole Miss would lose a game that they were supposed to either way. And even without the FPIs, they're still in that range of like upset, but not really. And we'll see exactly what happens. At this point, I've got Ole Miss at 8-3, getting ready for the Thanksgiving game at Mississippi State. Ole Miss will probably be a touchdown favorite in that game. Weirdness happens occasionally. We saw that last year. But all of the extra stuff, if it does not happen, if the extra stuff does not happen this year, this has a chance to be a Thanksgiving Day where Ole Miss could potentially be facing Mississippi State with a shot for the SEC championship game on the line. That is what's happened. And like I said, over to the right, you look at my picks, you can think of whatever you want about my picks. Over to the right is the FPI. That's the computers. And they obviously think very, very highly of the Ole Miss Rebels. It just really is. I hope everybody has a good Monday. SEC Media Days start today. Starting tomorrow, we'll hear from Greg Sankey, and we'll start to have highlights up on the show as well. I think in the second segment of the show, I think we're going to continue to do the breakdown segments of recruits. We'll hit the recruits we haven't done to this point. So anybody that fell between the cracks, if we can get something, we will put those guys up as well. We will get ready for the opening of fall camp, which I think happens sometime in the next 2 weeks. And it is officially go time. I'm very, very excited. So thank you very much for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. Everydayers, we are going to work to set up Charles Stackhouse. We got a lot of stuff going in. There's a new look morning walk for people that follow on their social medias. So that is pretty good as well. So until tomorrow, when this SEC Media Days event really kicks off in earnest, hotty toddy.